Before dawn, the compound was always quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a resting forest or a calm winter morning. This silence felt different, heavier, watchful, almost cautious, as if even the air had learned to move carefully within the walls of that place. Frost clung to the wooden fences surrounding the pack compound. The ground was stiff with cold, and a pale gray mist drifted slowly across the open yard. Only one person was awake. The Omega girl stepped carefully across the frozen earth, carrying two wooden buckets filled with water. The handles pressed painfully into her palms, numbing her fingers with cold. Her name was Elara. The bucket swayed slightly with each step, the water inside sloshing against the wooden rims. She kept her arms steady, though her shoulders trembled from the weight. Behind her stood the house where she lived, a large, sturdy building built from thick timber and stone. Light glowed faintly behind the shuttered windows. Her parents slept inside. They would not wake until the fire had been lit, breakfast prepared, and the morning chores completed. That was the order of things. Elara reached the back door and carefully lowered the buckets to the ground. Her breath escaped in a quiet cloud of white air. For a moment, she simply stood there, stretching her fingers. Then she picked up the buckets again and pushed the door open. Warm air brushed against her face. The kitchen was dark except for faint embers in the hearth. She knelt beside it and began feeding dry wood into the coals. The flames slowly stirred back to life. Soft orange light filled the room. Elara extended her hands toward the fire, allowing the warmth to seep into her skin. It was only a moment, but it felt precious. Moments like this belonged only to her. Once the house woke, the quiet would disappear. She rose and began preparing the morning meal, grinding grain, boiling water, slicing roots and vegetables. Her movements were careful and practiced. She had done these tasks every morning for as long as she could remember. Years ago, she used to hum while she worked. Now she did it only sometimes, very softly, when no one else was awake. A faint melody escaped her lips as she stirred the pot above the fire. It was not a song she remembered learning. It was simply something gentle her heart seemed to know. By the time the sky outside turned pale blue, the kitchen smelled of warm broth and fresh bread. Elara placed bowls carefully along the wooden table. Then she stepped back and waited. The sound of footsteps eventually echoed from the hallway. Her father entered first, broad-shouldered and heavy-footed. He sat down without acknowledging her. Her mother followed, tying her hair back with quick, impatient movements. Her eyes immediately scanned the table. "You're late today," she said sharply. Elara lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." The apology came easily. She had spoken it many times before. Her mother sniffed dismissively and sat down. They began eating. Neither of them asked if she had eaten. They never did. Elara remained standing nearby, ready in case they needed something. Her father finished his meal first and pushed the bowl aside. "The wood pile's low," he said. Her mother glanced toward the window. "And the yard needs sweeping. Leaves everywhere." Elara nodded quietly. "Yes." Her mother's voice hardened slightly. "And remember your place, girl. Omegas are meant to be useful. Don't forget who keeps a roof over your head." Elara bowed her head again. "I understand." The words felt hollow, but arguing had never changed anything. After they finished eating, Elara gathered the bowls and cleaned the table. When the kitchen was spotless again, she stepped outside. A cold wind swept across the yard. She wrapped her arms around herself briefly before walking toward the woodpile. The morning passed slowly, chopping wood, carrying water, scrubbing the stone floor. Inside the house, every task followed another without pause. Elara worked quietly. Rarely speaking, her parents moved around the house giving instructions, their voices sharp whenever they addressed her. But outside, the world was calmer. Birds perched along the fence posts. A small stream trickled beyond the compound, and at the far end of the yard stood the tall wooden fence, separating the pack territory from the forest. Elara finished stacking the firewood before slipping one small piece of bread into the pocket of her apron. She glanced toward the house. No one was watching, so she walked quietly toward the back fence. The forest beyond the compound looked pale beneath the winter sky. Snow dusted the ground beneath the trees. Near the bottom of the fence was a narrow gap where the wood had shifted slightly over time. Elara knelt beside it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then leaves rustled gently. A small gray wolf pup emerged from the brush. Its body was thin but lively, and its ears twitched as it approached cautiously. Elara smiled softly. Hello again. She placed the bread on the ground and slid it through the gap. The pup sniffed the air before eating. Elara watched quietly, resting her chin on her folded arms. This had become a secret routine between them. Weeks ago she had noticed the small creature lingering near the edge of the forest. At first it had been too frightened to come close, but hunger had slowly encouraged trust. Now it visited most mornings. Elara never tried to grab it. She simply sat nearby while it ate, and for those few quiet minutes, something warm filled the hollow place inside her chest. Because the pup did not look at her with disappointment, it did not sigh when she entered the room. It did not remind her she was only an amiga. It simply existed beside her. When the bread was gone, the pup wagged its tail once before darting back into the brush. Elara stood slowly. I'll see you tomorrow, she murmured. Then she returned to her chores. The rest of the day passed as the others always did. Her father argued with a neighbor outside. Her mother complained about supplies. The wind grew colder as evening approached. By nightfall, Elara's body ached with exhaustion. But before she went to sleep, she walked once more toward the back fence. The forest was darker now. Clouds covered the moon, leaving only faint shadows between the trees. Elara knelt beside the familiar gap. Little one, she whispered. No answer came. She waited. Minutes passed. A strange unease crept into her chest. Then she heard it. A faint sound carried through the still night. A whimper, soft, broken. Elara single quotes s. Heart tightened. She pushed aside the brush and leaned closer to the fence. There, a few steps beyond the gap, the wolf pup lay in the snow. Its small body trembled violently. Dark blood stained the white ground beneath it. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Oh no. The pup tried to crawl toward the fence but collapsed halfway. A deep wound marked its side. The sight sent fear rushing through her chest. If anyone in the compound discovered an injured wolf here, they would assume it belonged to rogue wolves. Rogues were enemies. They were killed immediately. Helping it would break pack law. And her parents would punish her without mercy. Elara knew this. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the fence. The pup whimpered again, dragging itself closer. Its nose pushed weakly through the gap, seeking warmth, seeking help. For a moment, Elara froze. Her entire life had been built on one lesson: do not cause trouble, do not break rules, do not risk anger. But the small creature's paw stretched toward her, its body shaking with pain, and something inside Elara refused to turn away. Slowly, she pushed her fingers through the gap and touched its fur. The pup leaned into her hand immediately, trusting her. Even now, tears stung her eyes. "You poor little thing." Her voice was barely a whisper. She glanced back toward the house. No one was outside. The compound lights flickered behind the windows. Her heart pounded in her chest. Helping it meant danger, punishment, maybe worse. But leaving it here meant watching it die, and Elara had already lived too long in a world where kindness was withheld. She could not become part of that world, not tonight. Carefully, she widened the gap beneath the fence. The wood creaked softly as she pushed it aside. Then she slipped through the opening. A cold snow soaked her shoes. Immediately, she knelt beside the trembling pup and lifted it gently into her arms. Before dawn, the compound was always quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a resting forest or a calm winter morning. This silence felt different, heavier, watchful, almost cautious, as if even the air had learned to move carefully within the walls of that place. Frost clung to the wooden fences surrounding the pack compound. The ground was stiff with cold, and a pale gray mist drifted slowly across the open yard. Only one person was awake. The Omega girls stepped carefully across the frozen earth, carrying two wooden buckets filled with water. The handles pressed painfully into her palms, numbing her fingers with cold. Her name was Elara. The bucket swayed slightly with each step, the water inside sloshing against the wooden rims. She kept her arms steady, though her shoulders trembled from the weight. Behind her stood the house where she lived, a large, sturdy building built from thick timber and stone. Light glowed faintly behind the shuttered windows. Her parents slept inside. They would not wake until the fire had been lit, breakfast prepared, and the morning chores completed. That was the order of things. Elara reached the back door and carefully lowered the buckets to the ground. Her breath escaped in a quiet cloud of white air. For a moment, she simply stood there, stretching her fingers. Then she picked up the buckets again and pushed the door open. Warm air brushed against her face. The kitchen was dark except for faint embers in the hearth. She knelt beside it and began feeding dry wood into the coals. The flames slowly stirred back to life. Soft orange light filled the room. Elara extended her hands toward the fire, allowing the warmth to seep into her skin. It was only a moment, but it felt precious. Moments like this belonged only to her. Once the house woke, the quiet would disappear. She rose and began preparing the morning meal, grinding grain, boiling water, slicing roots and vegetables. Her movements were careful and practiced. She had done these tasks every morning for as long as she could remember. Years ago, she used to hum while she worked. Now she did it only sometimes, very softly, when no one else was awake. A faint melody escaped her lips as she stirred the pot above the fire. It was not a song she remembered learning. It was simply something gentle her heart seemed to know. By the time the sky outside turned pale blue, the kitchen smelled of warm broth and fresh bread. Elara placed bowls carefully along the wooden table. Then she stepped back and waited. The sound of footsteps eventually echoed from the hallway. Her father entered first, broad-shouldered and heavy-footed. He sat down without acknowledging her. Her mother followed, tying her hair back with quick, impatient movements. Her eyes immediately scanned the table. "You're late today," she said sharply. Elara lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." The apology came easily. She had spoken it many times before. Her mother sniffed dismissively and sat down. They began eating. Neither of them asked if she had eaten. They never did. Elara remained standing nearby, ready in case they needed something. Her father finished his meal first and pushed the bowl aside. "The woodpile's low," he said. Her mother glanced toward the window. "And the yard needs sweeping. Leaves everywhere." Elara nodded quietly. "Yes." Her mother's voice hardened slightly. "And remember your place, girl. Omegas are meant to be useful. Don't forget who keeps a roof over your head." Elara bowed her head again. "I understand." The words felt hollow, but arguing had never changed anything. After they finished eating, Elara gathered the bowls and cleaned the table. When the kitchen was spotless again, she stepped outside. A cold wind swept across the yard. She wrapped her arms around herself briefly before walking toward the woodpile. The morning passed slowly, chopping wood, carrying water, scrubbing the stone floor. Inside the house, every task followed another without pause. Elara worked quietly, rarely speaking. Her parents moved around the house giving instructions, their voices sharp whenever they addressed her. But outside, the world was calmer. Birds perched along the fence posts. A small stream trickled beyond the compound, and at the far end of the yard stood the tall wooden fence, separating the pack territory from the forest. Elara finished stacking the firewood before slipping one small piece of bread into the pocket of her apron. She glanced toward the house. No one was watching, so she walked quietly toward the back fence. The forest beyond the compound looked pale beneath the winter sky. Snow dusted the ground beneath the trees. Near the bottom of the fence was a narrow gap where the wood had shifted slightly over time. Elara knelt beside it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then leaves rustled gently. A small gray wolf pup emerged from the brush. Its body was thin but lively, and its ears twitched as it approached cautiously. Elara smiled softly. "Hello again." She placed the bread on the ground and slid it through the gap. The pup sniffed the air before eating. Elara watched quietly, resting her chin on her folded arms. This had become a secret routine between them. Weeks ago she had noticed the small creature lingering near the edge of the forest. That first it had been too frightened to come close, but hunger had slowly encouraged trust. Now it visited most mornings. Elara never tried to grab it. She simply sat nearby while it ate, and for those few quiet minutes, something warm filled the hollow place inside her chest. Because the pup did not look at her with disappointment, and it did not sigh when she entered the room. It did not remind her she was only an omega. It simply existed beside her. When the bread was gone, the pup wagged its tail once before darting back into the brush. Elara stood slowly. "I'll see you tomorrow," she murmured. Then she returned to her chores. The rest of the day passed as the others always did. Her father argued with a neighbor outside. Her mother complained about supplies. The wind grew colder as evening approached. By nightfall, Elara's body ached with exhaustion. But before she went to sleep, she walked once more toward the back fence. The forest was darker now. Clouds covered the moon, leaving only faint shadows between the trees. Elara knelt beside the familiar gap. "Little one?" she whispered. No answer came. She waited. Minutes passed. A strange unease crept into her chest. Then she heard it. A faint sound carried through the still night. A whimper, soft, broken. Elara single quotes s. Heart tightened. She pushed aside the brush and leaned closer to the fence. There, a few steps beyond the gap, the wolf pup lay in the snow. Its small body trembled violently. Dark blood stained the white ground beneath it. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Oh no. The pup tried to crawl toward the fence but collapsed halfway. A deep wound marked its side. The sight sent fear rushing through her chest. If anyone in the compound discovered an injured wolf here, they would assume it belonged to rogue wolves. Rogues were enemies. They were killed immediately. Helping it would break pack law. And her parents would punish her without mercy. Elara knew this. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the fence. The pup whimpered again, dragging itself closer. Its nose pushed weakly through the gap, seeking warmth, seeking help. For a moment, Elara froze. Her entire life had been built on one lesson: do not cause trouble, do not break rules, do not risk anger. But the small creature's paw stretched toward her, its body shaking with pain and something inside. Elara refused to turn away. Slowly, she pushed her fingers through the gap and touched its fur. The pup leaned into her hand immediately, trusting her. Even now, tears stung her eyes. You poor little thing. Her voice was barely a whisper. She glanced back toward the house. No one was outside. The compound lights flickered behind the windows. Her heart pounded in her chest. Helping it meant danger, punishment, maybe worse. But leaving it here meant watching it die, and Elara had already lived too long in a world where kindness was withheld. She could not become part of that world, not tonight. Carefully, she widened the gap beneath the fence. The wood creaked softly as she pushed it aside. Then she slipped through the opening. A cold snow soaked her shoes. Immediately, she knelt beside the trembling pup and lifted it gently into her arms. It managed only a few shaky steps before collapsing gently against her knee. She caught it quickly. Easy. Her hand rested against its side again. Immediately, the tension in its body softened. The strange calming effect returned. Elara frowned slightly. I still don't understand that. She was about to adjust the bandage when the pup suddenly stiffened. A strange shiver ran through its small body. Then something even stranger happened. Its form flickered. Just for a second. Fur seemed to ripple and shift. Elara's breath caught. The pup whimpered, its body trembling violently. And for one brief moment, she saw something impossible. A small human hand. Then the shape returned to that of a wolf pup. Elara stared at it in stunned silence. Her heart began racing. No. Her voice barely emerged. That's not possible. Only Lycan bloodlines could shift between forms. Only the royal bloodlines could do so at such a young age. Her gaze fell slowly to the trembling creature in her arms. The silver blue eyes looked up at her again, fear mixed with trust inside them. Elara's chest tightened. You. The words felt unreal. You're not just a wolf. The pup whimpered softly. Its paw gripped weakly against her sleeve. Then, in a voice barely louder than breath, a single word escaped its lips. Help. Elara froze. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. All the rumors from the guards returned to her mind. A missing royal cub, search parties across the territory. And now, the truth lay trembling in her arms. Helping him was no longer simply breaking pack rules. If anyone discovered the cub here, her pack might try to claim him. Or worse, use him. A storm of fear filled her thoughts. But the small hand clinging to her sleeve tightened. The cub looked at her again, trusting her. Even now, Elara closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her decision had already formed. She adjusted the blanket around the trembling child wolf. It's all right, she whispered softly. I'll protect you." Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve did not. "No matter what it costs me." The forest was colder than she remembered. Snow crunched beneath her boots, each step leaving a shallow mark in the frozen ground. Her arms ached from carrying the small bundle closer to the deeper trees, farther from the prying eyes of the compound. Every sound, the whisper of wind through the branches, the crack of ice beneath her feet, made her heart jump. The cub's breathing was shallow, uneven, and she could feel the warmth of his small body fading under her arms. His fur, once silver blue and soft, was matted with blood, and his small chest rose and fell with visible effort. Elara pressed the bundle closer to her chest. "Hold on," she whispered. "Just a little longer. I'll keep you safe." Night had fallen entirely, and the forest had become a shadowed maze. She had moved quickly, but exhaustion and fear had slowed her. Each step was heavier than the last. Her muscles screamed. Her body ached from days of sleep-deprived work. Yet she refused to stop, and by the time she reached a small clearing near a frozen stream, she was trembling violently, not from the cold, but from the strain of carrying him and from the panic rising in her chest. She knelt in the snow, laying the cub gently against a bed of pine boughs she had gathered as a makeshift mattress. His small head lolled to one side, eyes fluttering weakly. Elara brushed hair away from his face, her fingers trembling. A strange heat radiated from his wounds, and she realized, almost with disbelief, that the trembling in his limbs eased slightly whenever her hands rested on him. The truth forced itself into her mind like a sudden winter wind. Her touch was helping him, her warmth, her presence. Something in her very being seemed to soothe the poison that was coursing through his veins. She pressed her hands to his chest, closed her eyes, and let herself focus entirely on the small life before her. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, she had lost count. She had no sense of time, only the pulse of her own heartbeat against his. Each beat a prayer, each breath a silent promise. She whispered softly, speaking words she had never allowed herself to think for herself. "Stay with me, please. Stay with me." The cub's body shuddered again, and she knew he was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, keeping her voice low, soft, controlled. Fear could not dominate now. Not here. Not while he depended on her. Her mind flickered with memories she had tried to forget. Her parents' cold words, their hands dismissing her, punishing her. Her life of labor, of endless days with no warmth, no kindness. And yet here she was, holding the life of another being in her arms, choosing to protect instead of surrendering to despair. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of real responsibility, not for herself, but for someone utterly dependent on her. It was terrifying, but somehow it gave her a strange clarity. The poison was not ordinary. She had never seen such injuries before. Every wound seemed designed to weaken the cub, to drain the life from him. And yet, with each touch, her hands radiated a calm she could not explain. She realized slowly, almost reluctantly, that she possessed a rare Omega gift. She had always known she was different, weaker in rank, overlooked in every way, but this was something more. A form of empathy, a conduit for life, a way to stabilize the wounded. Elara pressed her forehead to the cub's small head. "I'll do whatever I have to. Just hold on." The night dragged on, icy and silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees or the distant cry of an owl. Her arms ached unbearably, her legs shook beneath her, but she did not move. She could not. The cub's life depended on her focus, on her presence, on her touch. Eventually, She heard the sound of footsteps, or maybe it was only the snow settling around her. She froze, holding the cub tighter. Any noise could betray her. Guards from her own pack could come at any moment, and if they discovered her hiding a royal Lycan, the consequences would be catastrophic. She pressed the cub closer. "SHH. It's all right. I'm right here. You're safe." A sudden thought pierced her mind. What if she could not save him? What if the poison was too strong, too insidious for her small hands to counter? Panic surged, but she pushed it aside, letting only determination fill her chest. There was no room for fear, only care, only life. Hours or perhaps only minutes later, the cub began to stir. His small body twitched weakly, then his eyes opened, revealing the same silver-blue color that had startled her before. But now there was recognition, trust, a fragile hope. Elara's heart swelled and cracked all at once. "You're going to make it," she whispered, tears streaking her face. "I won't let you die." The forest remained still around them, a quiet witness to her devotion. She had given everything she had, her strength, her warmth, her very energy, pouring it into the cub. Her body ached, but she did not care. The only thing that mattered was the life in her arms, fragile yet unyielding. Suddenly, the cub shifted fully into human form for a brief, fleeting moment, revealing the unmistakable identity she had feared to name aloud. A young boy, no older than 5, with silver-blue eyes and fine, pale hair. His chest heaved as he struggled to breathe, and Elara's pulse raced violently. "Oh, you're not just a pup," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "You're royal." Her mind spun. The stories she had overheard, the missing cub, the search parties, the king himself, everything suddenly aligned in a terrifying clarity. Helping him was no longer merely breaking pack law. This was protection of royal blood, something her parents' pack could never allow. They could use him, demand his return, or worse. Elara swallowed hard. Her jaw ached, her limbs shook, and yet she refused to let panic rule her. I will protect you," she murmured, "no matter what happens." The cub's small hand found hers instinctively, clinging with desperate trust. The weight of that tiny grip settled heavily in her chest. A life entrusted to her, a responsibility she had never asked for but could not refuse. Night deepened around them. Snow drifted softly over the clearing, quiet and unyielding. Elara held the boy, whispering to him, guiding him, keeping him alive with every ounce of strength she had left. And when the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, dark and cold, she made a silent vow. She would keep him safe, even if it cost her everything. Her hands pressed to his wounds once more, and she felt the warmth of life slowly returning to the fragile body in her arms. "I won't leave you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I promise. I'll stay with you." The night stretched on, but she did not falter. She was the shield. She was the warmth. She was the quiet heart holding a life that might otherwise have been lost. Somewhere far beyond the tree line, pack guards searched the territory for the missing royal cub. But here, in this frozen forest, one Omega girl gave everything she had, refusing to abandon a small, fragile life. And in that decision, something unbreakable was born. A bond of trust, fragile yet steadfast, that would shape the fate of all their lives. She rocked him gently, whispering soft encouragement, tears freezing on her cheeks. For hours, the world narrowed to this small clearing, this quiet struggle, and the unshakable determination of a girl who would risk everything for another's life. By the first pale light of dawn, exhaustion overwhelmed her. Her limbs failed. Her body sagged against the cold snow. But still, She pressed the boy to her chest, letting her rare gift, her empathy, flow into him one final time. Then, with the last effort of her trembling arms, she collapsed beside him. The forest fell silent, two small figures lay motionless in the snow, and far beyond, the search parties moved tirelessly, unaware that the boy they sought was already cradled in the arms of someone who would never abandon him. For now, there was stillness, and in that stillness, life persisted, fragile but unbroken, in the quiet, devoted care of an Omega who had finally chosen to place love above fear. The forest had never been so still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as if it, too, understood the gravity of the frozen clearing. Elara's body was pressed against the snow, exhausted beyond measure. Her muscles trembled violently, every movement a struggle. Yet she still clutched the boy to her chest, his small form warm against her, as if the life she poured into him were binding them together. She had no sense of time, only the rhythm of his shallow breathing, each tiny rise and fall of his chest a lifeline she refused to release. The rare gift she possessed, the healing empathy she had only just discovered, had carried them both through the darkest hours. She had poured herself into him completely, unknowingly absorbing the poison coursing through his veins. But even now, when the worst seemed past, danger lingered. The forest was no place for an unprotected Omega and a wounded royal child. Wolves patrolled the edges. Packs searched beyond the trees. The shadow of discovery loomed over her, heavy and constant. Then, a scent drifted through the trees, carried on the cold breeze. Something unfamiliar, commanding, undeniable. Her heart skipped. She froze, every nerve alert. The scent was powerful male, disciplined, and calm. Yet it held no threat, only an intensity that made her instinctively tighten her hold on the boy. From the edge of the clearing, he emerged. A wolf at first, massive and silver-furred, moving with the grace and authority of a predator who knew he could dominate any pack he wished, but chose not to. Then, as the distance closed, he shifted into human form, tall, broad-shouldered, composed. His eyes, sharp and discerning, took in the scene with the quiet calculation of someone accustomed to assessing danger. In a single glance, Elara's breath caught. The king, the very ruler whose son she cradled in her arms. He paused a few steps away, studying her, and she realized that he had sensed her presence without sound, without movement. Her body went rigid. The boy stirred weakly but did not cry. Somehow, he recognized the king, yet he clung to her instinctively, as if the bond they had formed in these desperate hours outweighed any recognition of authority. The king knelt slowly, a gesture of respect and calm, his eyes scanning both the boy and Elara. He could see immediately what had happened. The cub, weakened by poison, saved through the unwavering care of the girl who had risked everything to protect him. Elara, the king said softly, his voice carrying the weight of command yet no hint of accusation. You saved him. Her eyes widened. I didn't know. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. I couldn't leave him. He was dying. The king reached out, carefully, making no sudden movement that might alarm her. His hands hovered near the boy, and Elara instinctively shifted, shielding him. But the king's eyes softened, and she felt no pressure, no dominance, only understanding. You did the right thing, he said quietly, even when it could have cost you everything. Tears pricked at Elara's eyes. I didn't want him to die. She shook her head slightly. I didn't know what else to do. He nodded, his gaze moving between the cub and her. And yet you acted. You trusted yourself. That is more than most could manage. The king lifted the boy gently, examining him for injuries without breaking the calm rhythm of his voice. He detected the faint traces of poison, the subtle stabilizing influence of her touch. It was remarkable, rare, perhaps unique. Only an Omega with a gift of empathy could have sustained life under such conditions. He looked at Elara again, and for the first time, a faint trace of something stirred within him, a quiet acknowledgement that this girl, who had lived in suffering and neglect, had chosen compassion over her own safety, that she had done what most would not dare, that she had acted with courage, patience, and quiet strength. You saved him, Elara. Your touch, your care, it has given him life. Her chest swelled with relief, yet terror still lingered. But what happens now? She whispered. If my pack finds out, if my parents know. He shook his head slightly. You have done nothing wrong. You saved a life. That is not something to be punished for. Elara blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. In all her life, no one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever offered reassurance without conditions, without expectation, without judgment. The king moved closer, maintaining a respectful distance, yet ready to act should danger appear. He draped his cloak carefully over the boy, providing warmth, then glanced at her. We must get him to safety. You have done more than enough for one night. With deliberate gentleness, he lifted the boy into his arms, careful not to jar the fragile form. Elara watched, frozen, as the small chest rose and fell steadily beneath the king's careful hold. She wanted to follow, to stay close, but exhaustion weighed on her like chains. He turned his gaze to her again. Come, he said softly. I will not leave you here alone. She hesitated. But my parents. He shook his head. Not now. Nothing else matters at this moment. You have earned safety. That is all that matters. Reluctantly, she allowed herself to rise, her legs trembling. The snow clung to her cloak, her gloves soaked, but she followed silently, staying just behind him. The forest seemed impossibly vast, yet the king moved with unwavering confidence, each step sure and precise, guided by a mix of instinct and experience. Eventually, they reached a small clearing, near a protected royal outpost, a place hidden from the usual patrol routes. Lights glowed softly in the windows, and the faint scent of herbs and warm fire reached them even before they entered. The king carried the cub inside carefully, laying him on a bed of soft blankets. The boy stirred, then blinked sleepily at Elara. Recognition flashed in his eyes, and he reached weakly toward her. Elara hesitated, unsure if she should allow it. But the king's gaze met hers, calm and approving, and she stepped closer. The cub immediately clung to her, burying his face in her chest. Elara knelt beside the bed, stroking his hair softly. I'm here, she whispered. I won't leave you. The king watched in silence, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. He had seen many things in his years as ruler. Yet this moment, the quiet bravery, the selfless protection, the rare gift of empathy left him quietly in awe. Eventually, a soft knock came at the door. An older healer, a woman whose face was lined with experience and care, entered carefully. She examined the cub, nodding to herself as she noticed the faint signs of the unique empathy that had sustained him. You did this, she said softly, looking at Elara. Through your touch, your presence, you stabilized him. Without you, he would not have survived. Elara's breath caught. I didn't know I could. The healer smiled gently. Some hearts survive cruelty without turning cold. Those hearts are the rarest in the world. The king remained standing a short distance away, his gaze on Elara. Her quiet strength, her compassion in the face of fear and danger, had revealed a side of humanity he rarely witnessed. For days, Elara remained unconscious beside the cub. The healer monitored her closely, ensuring that her energy, drained from the effort of saving the boy, was replenished. When she finally awoke, the cub stirred and called out softly, "Kind girl." The kind girl who stayed. Elara's eyes fluttered open. Recognition sparked, and a faint warmth spread through her chest. The boy had survived, and in that survival, she had found a small, fragile connection that no amount of fear or cruelty could erase. The king sat quietly by her side one night, studying her sleeping form, observing the peaceful expression on her face. No words were spoken, no actions forced. He simply watched, understanding fully the courage it had taken for her to act without expectation, without command, without claim. For the first time, a faint bond stirred within him, a recognition that their fates, intertwined by bravery and compassion, might hold something extraordinary. But he did not act. Not yet. For now, she was simply a brave soul who had earned safety. And in the quiet sanctuary of the royal outpost, life began to recover its fragile rhythm. The cub slept peacefully, safe in the care of both the healer and the girl who had risked everything. Elara, still weak but alive, realized slowly that she had found something she had never known in her own life. A place where kindness mattered, where bravery was recognized, and where the weight of cruelty did not define her. Outside, the winter forest waited silently, but inside, a quiet miracle had occurred, one born of selfless care, rare empathy, and the courage to act even when the world offered no protection. The king, seated a few feet away, remained silent, watching, learning, and slowly, without force or expectation, beginning to understand the extraordinary value of the Omega girl who had saved his son. For now, there was safety. For now, the bond between them, fragile and unspoken, had taken root. In the world outside could wait. Here, in the quiet warmth of the sanctuary, life was being rewritten, one gentle, deliberate choice at a time. The morning sun filtered gently through the frosted windows of the royal sanctuary, casting soft streaks of gold across the worn wooden floor. Inside, the air was warm, fragrant with herbs and faint smoke from the hearth. Elara's eyes fluttered open slowly, her body aching from the long hours of exertion and near collapse. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the gentle murmur of breathing nearby drew her attention, and she saw the small figure of the cub curled against a bundle of blankets at the foot of the bed. Relief surged through her chest. He was safe. He was alive. She tried to move, but the ache in her limbs made her pause. The healer, sitting quietly in a corner, smiled softly at her, her hands resting over a steaming cup of tea. "You've done enough, child," the healer said gently. "Your body needs rest now." Elara nodded faintly, unsure if her body could obey. But the cub stirred and looked up at her, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. Without hesitation, he scrambled toward her, his small legs trembling, and clung to her arm. "It's all right," she whispered, voice raspy. "I'm here. I won't leave you." The healer watched the scene unfold quietly, and even she could not suppress a small sigh of awe. It was remarkable, the trust this child had for a stranger, a girl who had risked everything for him. And yet it felt natural, inevitable, as though something in him had always known her. The king, seated silently in the corner, observed the interaction from a distance. His presence was calm, non-intrusive, yet every movement was deliberate. He did not rush forward. He did not take the child from her. He simply allowed the bond to exist, to grow. There was patience in his posture, in the measured stillness with which he watched. Elara carefully lowered the boy back onto the blankets, brushing stray snow from his hair. "You're safe now," she murmured. "No one can hurt you here." He blinked up at her, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You stayed. You didn't leave me," he whispered, her heart clenched at his words. She shook her head softly. "Never," she replied. "I promised I would stay." The king's gaze softened imperceptibly. In all his years as ruler, he had seen countless acts of courage, countless warriors and protectors. But this quiet, selfless devotion, the choice to protect without hope of reward, was rare. Far rarer than most would ever recognize. Days passed slowly, marked by small, deliberate rhythms. Elara remained in the sanctuary, the healer ensuring she was nourished, kept warm, and allowed to rest. The boy, however, refused to stay away from her. Each time she attempted to encourage him to rest or play elsewhere, he returned to her side, clinging, insisting on her presence. The king observed these moments quietly, noting the subtleties of their connection. There was no rush, no attempt to manipulate feelings, no sense of command, only patience and gentle guidance. He understood that trust must be earned, not demanded. Elara slowly regained her strength, aided by warm meals, herbal tonics, and the unspoken reassurance that she was not at risk of punishment or judgment. It was an unfamiliar sensation. In her previous life, safety had always been conditional. Here, safety was given freely, without expectation. The cub's presence became a bridge between them. His laughter, faint but growing stronger each day, echoed softly through the sanctuary. He insisted on reading stories aloud to her, recounting tales of distant territories and adventures. Sometimes, they would walk through the small gardens that surrounded the sanctuary, the boy's small hand tucked securely into hers. Each step reinforced an understanding that she had never experienced: belonging. The king continued to watch, often from a distance, allowing the bond to develop naturally. He asked questions softly, gently probing her thoughts, learning about her past without judgment. He learned of her parents' cruelty, the endless labor, the life of invisibility she had endured. And though anger flickered briefly in his gaze, it was tempered by understanding and restraint. He never demanded that she recount her suffering, nor did he attempt to fix her wounds with force. He simply allowed her to share as much or as little as she wished. Elara, in turn, began to experience emotions she had long suppressed. She felt the warmth of care, the gentle insistence of someone believing in her. The cub's trust and attachment gave her purpose, a tangible measure of her value in the world. One afternoon, as she knelt beside the boy on the floor, helping him tie a simple toy he had found in a corner of the sanctuary, the king approached quietly. He did not sit. He merely leaned against the doorway, observing. "You've done more than anyone could ask," he said softly. "Not for reward, not for recognition. You acted because it was right. That is rare." Elara's gaze flicked to him. "I didn't do it for praise," she murmured. "I just couldn't leave him." He nodded. "And yet your courage has changed more than just his life. It has changed yours as well." Her breath caught. She had not considered that. She had thought only of his survival, of protecting him from harm, of keeping him alive through exhaustion and fear. Yet in doing so, she had discovered something within herself, a reservoir of strength, empathy, and resilience that she had never fully realized. Over the following days, routines formed. The cub became inseparable from her, often sleeping at the edge of her bed or sitting beside her as she worked on simple tasks. Around the sanctuary, the king allowed it. recognizing that forcing distance would only weaken the trust they had cultivated. Elara noticed the small, subtle ways the king interacted with them. He would adjust a blanket, offer a kind word, or simply remain nearby, silent and watchful. He never commanded her, never intruded unnecessarily. His presence was steady, comforting, and unobtrusive, an anchor without a tether. Trust blossomed slowly. Elara began to feel that the sanctuary was a place where her choices mattered, where her actions were valued, and where her presence was desired rather than tolerated. She could smile without fear, laugh softly without expectation, and nurture without the constant shadow of judgment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the garden, the boy ran to her, tugging her hand insistently. "Come, come see," he shouted, his small voice brimming with excitement. Elara followed, curious despite her fatigue. In the center of the garden, a small patch of frost-kissed flowers had bloomed unexpectedly. The boy knelt beside them, his eyes shining. "Look, they grew because you were here. Your magic." Elara chuckled softly, kneeling beside him. "No, just care," she replied. Her fingers brushed the delicate petals, and she felt an inexplicable warmth ripple through her. The king, observing from the doorway, allowed a rare, small smile to touch his lips. He recognized that this simple interaction, laughter, wonder, and gentle guidance was more powerful than any decree or command. Bonds built through trust and kindness were unbreakable, enduring beyond force or fear. Evenings passed quietly. The healer continued her gentle oversight, the cub's laughter and chatter a constant presence. Elara began to feel a sense of family. She had never known the quiet rhythm of companionship, the assurance that her actions mattered, and the simple joy of being valued for herself. The king occasionally joined them, reading quietly in the corner or walking the gardens in the soft light of dusk. Each interaction was deliberate yet unobtrusive, a silent acknowledgement that Elara's agency mattered. His restraint, his patience, and his quiet respect strengthened the sanctuary, allowing trust to grow naturally. By the time the seventh day arrived, Elara realized she had begun to heal not just from the physical exhaustion and cold, but from years of rejection and neglect. She no longer flinched at every sharp word or glance, and she felt a calm certainty in her choices and her value. The cub's laughter, the warmth of safety, and the king's unobtrusive respect had woven a new tapestry of belonging in her heart. One evening, as she tucked the boy into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "You're staying, right?" he whispered. Elara smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Always," she murmured. Outside, the winter wind howled gently against the walls of the sanctuary. But inside, warmth and quiet laughter filled the air. The bonds of trust and affection were no longer fragile. They had taken root, steady and resilient. And as Elara watched the boy drift into sleep, she felt a deep, unshakable truth settle within her. She had found a place where kindness was valued, where courage was recognized, and where love, quiet, steadfast, and patient, was allowed to grow naturally. The king's presence remained steady, a silent promise of protection without possession. In that calm, deliberate space, the three of them, the girl, the cub, and the king, began to form the fragile beginnings of a family built not on rank or duty, but on choice, trust, and care. For the first time in her life, Elara allowed herself to believe she could belong somewhere, and in that belief, hope bloomed. Winter's last chill still lingered in the early morning air, though sunlight now fell warmly across the royal garden. Elara stood quietly near the edge of a flower bed, brushing snow from the folds of her cloak. The cub ran ahead, laughter bubbling through the crisp air as he chased a small, stray butterfly that had found its way through the frost. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply watch, feeling a gentle pulse of peace settle in her chest. But the moment of calm was fragile. The stillness of the sanctuary was broken by the distant sound of hooves and voices. Messengers had arrived, their presence deliberate, carrying the authority of her original pack. They had come demanding her return. Their words, sharp and cold, spoke of ownership, of rules, of a girl who belonged to them and no one else. Elara's hands tightened slightly around the edge of her cloak. Fear flared for only an instant before she remembered the sanctuary, the warmth, the safety, and the child who depended on her. This was the first time in her life that someone had allowed her choice. And now she had to decide. The king approached slowly, walking with quiet assurance beside her. His presence was grounding, calm, yet unmistakably powerful. He had made no attempt to assert authority over her in the past days. He would not start now. "They demand you return," he said softly, his voice carrying no judgment, only a clear acknowledgement. "But that is not your decision to make for them. That choice is yours alone." Elara swallowed, the weight of those words pressing against her chest. For so long, every decision had been made for her, every movement, every choice, every action dictated by others. She had been invisible, disregarded, treated as nothing more than a tool. And now, for the first time, someone was asking her what she wanted. Her gaze drifted toward the cub, who had stopped mid-chase and was looking up at her with wide, anxious eyes. He ran to her side, clinging to her hand as though sensing the storm that had come to the gates. His trust anchored her, reminding her of the courage she had found these past days, the courage to act, to protect, to care. She began, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want power. I don't want to be anyone's servant. She looked down at the child clinging to her, a silent plea in his eyes. "I just want a place where kindness is normal, where I don't have to be afraid." The king's expression softened, a quiet acknowledgement settling over him. He reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. A simple gesture that carried respect, care, and patience. He did not claim her. He did not demand her obedience. He simply offered her presence, steady and unthreatening. "You may stay," he said quietly. "Not as a servant, not as an omega to bear the burden of others, but as someone who is valued, someone who belongs." Tears pricked at the corners of Elara's eyes. She had never been offered such a choice, never been seen as more than her rank or her labor. The magnitude of it pressed on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She looked at the cub, who squeezed her hand tightly and whispered, "Stay. Please stay." A small, bittersweet smile touched her lips. She had found belonging. She had found safety. And most importantly, she had found someone who asked her, finally, what she wanted. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. I'll stay." The king nodded once, subtly, his eyes never leaving hers. He stepped back, giving her space, reinforcing the fact that her choice was hers and hers alone. The weight of control, the expectation of obedience, it was gone. She was free. The cub laughed then, a clear, joyful sound that echoed across the garden. He ran ahead, chasing after the snowflakes glinting in the sunlight. His small form a bright, living symbol of the life that had been saved and the bonds that had formed. Elara knelt briefly, brushing snow from his hair and smiling softly. "Be careful," she murmured. "Don't run too far." The king approached, standing beside her now, silent but supportive. He did not touch, did not demand, but his presence was steady, grounding. He had seen her courage, her compassion, her ability to choose kindness over fear. He had witnessed her strength and resilience, and he understood fully that these qualities were not to be controlled, but respected. For a long moment, the three of them, girl, child, and king, stood together in the quiet garden. No words were necessary. Their connection, built over days of trust, care, and quiet courage, spoke more powerfully than any proclamation. The boy laughed again, spinning in the snow, and Elara allowed herself to feel the warmth of home, the depth of belonging she had never known, even when the messengers lingered at the gates, demanding her return. The king did not speak harshly or issue threats. He simply stood, unwavering, ready to act if necessary, but leaving the decision entirely to her. She had been invisible for so long, treated as property, judged by her rank, dismissed for her weakness. Now, finally, she was asked to speak, and she had done so. Elara felt the weight of her past life lift slowly from her shoulders. She was no longer defined by cruelty or neglect. She was no longer bound by fear or expectation. Here, in the warmth of the sanctuary, she was seen. She was valued. She was safe. The day stretched on, sunlight spilling across the frost-tipped gardens. Elara walked slowly alongside the cub, the boy chattering happily about stories he had imagined during his recovery. She listened, smiling softly, occasionally brushing her hand across the king's sleeve in a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the three of them gathered near the center of the garden. The king allowed the boy to run ahead and play, his laughter ringing clearly, while Elara and the king stood together quietly. There was no rush, no demand, only the steady, unspoken knowledge that this was her home, her choice, her belonging. Elara looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to feel completely seen, completely safe, completely valued. Her eyes met his, and in that shared, silent glance, she understood something profound. Kindness had earned her a place in the world. Courage had earned her respect, and choice had earned her freedom. The king smiled faintly, the first hint of warmth that was not bound to duty or protocol. "You chose well," he said softly, his voice calm yet imbued with quiet admiration. Elara nodded, feeling the depth of meaning in his words. I just wanted to protect him. I didn't know what else to do." "And yet," he replied, "that choice has changed everything. For him, for you, and for all of us." The boy ran back to them, his small hands holding a handful of frost-dusted flowers. He pressed them into Elara's hands, his eyes shining. "For you," he whispered, "because you stayed." Elara smiled, tears brimming in her eyes, and hugged him gently. The warmth of the moment, the laughter, the bond they shared, it was more than she had ever dared hope for. The king watched, his expression calm yet touched by the quiet, undeniable power of love born from choice and trust. He had led armies, ruled territories, and commanded loyalty through fear or respect, but never had he witnessed a force so unbreakable, so pure, as the courage and compassion of a girl who had been overlooked her entire life. And in that quiet garden, amidst the soft laughter and the gentle glow of the evening, Elara finally understood what it meant to belong. She was no longer the Omega who labored unnoticed. She was no longer defined by cruelty or neglect. She was a valued presence, cherished and respected, with a family she had chosen, and who had chosen her in return. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. The boy clung to her hand, the king's presence steady at her side. And for the first time, the world felt safe, warm, and entirely hers. She looked around the garden one last time as the stars began to appear. A quiet, steady smile spreading across her face. Here, in this sanctuary, she had found home. Here, she had found freedom. Here, she had finally found a place where kindness, courage, and choice were rewarded with belonging. The king's eyes met hers once more, calm, respectful, and full of quiet understanding. No words were necessary. The trust, the protection, the care they spoke louder than any declaration. The boy laughed again, spinning in the soft snow. Elara knelt to join him, brushing a small hand across his hair, feeling the warmth of life and love in a way she had never known. And as she stood, hand in hand with the child, the king walking beside them, she realized fully that she had arrived at a place she had only dreamed of. A home where she was cherished, where she was safe, and where she had finally, completely, a family of her own. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying away the remnants of fear and sorrow, leaving behind only warmth, laughter, and the quiet certainty of belonging. And in that quiet, luminous evening, Elara, once overlooked and unseen, finally understood what it meant to be valued, loved, and free, standing beside the boy she had saved, beside the king who had honored her choice, at the heart of a family she had always longed for. The garden was alive with possibility, laughter, and quiet joy. The story that had begun in fear, suffering, and